So I've worded this. I've titled this "Why Your Business Doesn't Need Terms and Conditions." This is my my sense of humour more than anything else. So rather than telling people why they should have terms and conditions, I'll tell you why you don't need it. You don't need to bother. But firstly, let's talk about what terms and conditions are and what a contract is. So terms and conditions are effectively a contract. And they are the written form of the agreement between two or more parties. So a verbal contract, a gentleman's handshake, is enforceable in law. If you have a dispute over it, completely enforceable, you can go to court over it. But it's he said, she said. There's no written agreement on what the agreed terms between the parties were. So we write things down, and that's what we do in terms and conditions or a contract. So we can set out those agreed terms. They could be the obligations on each party, what the duties are, what each party is going to do. We set out the price, the payment obligations, when it's going to be paid. We can set out liability issues. We can set out things like whether or not it's confidential or whether or not we keep certain aspects of things confidential. Who owns the intellectual property if anything's generated from it, and much more besides. So we can put a lot of information into terms and conditions or contracts. So reiterate, terms and conditions then are a standard form of a contract, which sets out what terms you are prepared to operate and engage your customers, your suppliers, whoever you're dealing with on. So why don't you need to worry about them then, right? You don't need to worry about terms and conditions if you're not interested in portraying a professional image. If you don't care about how your business looks and you want to be, Bob the Builder, no disrespect to the building industry, you don't want to come across as professional, then don't bother with terms and conditions. Because in my view, terms and conditions make businesses just look that extra bit more professional. You're sending somebody out the quote, the terms and conditions, you're asking them to sign the terms and conditions and return them back to you. It just makes you look a step above your competitors who probably aren't doing it. It just makes you look more professional. It looks like you've prepared. It looks like you've done this before. And I think that's really important, that image look to start with. Second reason why you don't need terms and conditions, if you don't like certainty. So if you're not a fan of having things certain, don't bother with terms and conditions. But if you do like certainty, then have some terms and conditions, because terms and conditions help you create the certainty of the agreement. As I said before, it sets down in writing what has been agreed between the two parties. And it means it's completely enforceable and much more enforceable than a verbal agreement between two parties. And much better if it's written down, gives everybody some certainty as to what we've agreed. Third reason, you don't have terms and conditions if you don't like getting paid on time. If you do like getting paid on time, have some terms and conditions, because terms and conditions allow you to set payment terms. That could be, for instance, on production of an invoice, 50% upfront, all upfront, stage payments, 60 days, whatever the payment terms. We can put them in a contract, put them in a terms and conditions, and we both know where we're at. And what that means is that then when the customer doesn't comply, you can then start to say, well, hang on a minute, the terms and conditions say that you need to pay this within 30 days, you've not paid, and therefore I can take some legal action to force the payment. We can also incorporate terms in there about interest and compensation for late payment as well, so that there's some consequences of not making payment on time as well. Fourth reason, 4 is that number. Fourth reason not to have terms and conditions, if you like having unlimited liability. If you're happy for somebody to sue you and take everything you've got, then don't bother with having a contract. If, however, you want to make sure that your house, your family, your livelihood is protected, you want to make sure that if the worst happens and something does go wrong, that you're not sued for every single penny that you've got. And in the terms and conditions, when you're trading with a business-to-business situation, you can have in there limitation of liability clauses, which limit your liability to what you want. So you could say, I'm not liable for loss of profit, damage to reputation, or things like that. And you can limit your liability to, for example, a specific amount, £1,000, £10,000, or £1 million, whatever. Or you could limit them to, say, the aggregate of the invoices raised, so that if the worst happens, and sometimes it does, if the worst happens and you're not insured for that loss, that your liability is limited. The fifth reason why you don't need to have terms and conditions if you don't like being legally compliant. If you do want to be legally compliant, think about having some terms and conditions, particularly if you are dealing with a consumer. Consumers have lots of rights and lots of information that's needed to be told to them at the outset of having a contract, particularly if you're doing distance selling online or over the phone, and particularly things like data protection, GDPR. So to be legally compliant, particularly with consumers, you need to have things in writing. So do that. And that's it. 5 reasons why you don't need to have terms and conditions, or perhaps why you should think about it. Number 6 is you've thought, okay, Stephen, you've persuaded me. I will have some terms and conditions. I'll type in terms and conditions on the internet. I'll find some free ones online. I'm sure they'll be fine and dandy. And my response to that is this, that you're potentially dealing with tens of thousands of pounds of risk here, and maybe more. It depends on what size business you're doing and what size trade you're doing. And would you risk it for DIY? Whereas if you get somebody that is, an authorized, regulated lawyer or insured individual that can provide advice on terms and conditions, at least you know that if it does go wrong and something happens and these terms and conditions don't quite work for how you wanted, you've got some recourse. You'll also know that, if they've been drafted properly, they're going to fit exactly what you need it for. And I should say, in doing some research for this short presentation, most of the terms and conditions that I've seen online as free terms and conditions generators are actually for website terms of use and not trading terms and conditions. Website terms of use, something completely different, and quite frankly, not as essential item as terms and conditions. So that's me. I'm Stephen May, the solicitor, and that is 5 reasons why you don't need to worry about having terms and conditions. Thank you.